Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, addressing the dropout crisis one strategy at a time. Brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center Network with support from K-12 and Fuel Education and in partnership with Clemson Broadcast Productions.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, brought to you by K-12 and Fuel Education. I'm Sandy Addis, Director of the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University, and we're pleased to bring to you another episode of Solutions. In Solutions broadcast, we undertake to bring you resources and information on programs, tools, initiatives, things that people are doing out there in the field, out in the world of education, and out in communities to improve graduation rates and help students succeed. Today, we're very pleased to be in Orlando, Florida. We're here at a conference, Reaching the Wounded Student Conference and Freshman Success Conference, two events that we have going on here in Orlando, Florida. We have a number of events at the National Dropout Prevention Center that we invite you to participate in. Our next conference will be our National Dropout Prevention Conference, October 23 through 25 in Palm Springs, California. I invite you to go to our website, take a look at our events, take a look at our other offerings. We have many tools and resources, including the archived Solutions broadcast like the one you're about to view with us today. Our website is easy to find. Just Google the phrase Dropout Prevention and it'll be the first hit, or go to www.dropoutprevention.org. I'm pleased to have with me today Karen Withington. Karen is Assistant Director at the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University. Karen, tell us how people can connect with us about this broadcast and introduce our presenters.
Okay, well, each month we try to bring a different topic to our viewers, and along with the webcast, we include information about the guests who are on the webinar and resources related to that topic. So that'll be on that web page with the webcast on our website. And then there are various ways we can continue a discussion about this topic. One is we have a Facebook account, we have Twitter at NDPCN, and at the bottom of the actual webcast page on our website is also a discussion board. So we can converse that way. Our guest will be available to answer questions, and then we'll also include contact information in the PowerPoint for direct contact with our guests.
Great, Karen. So our topic today is tools for creating a trauma-informed school. Karen, introduce our presenters.
Okay. Well, to your right, Sandy, is Mr. Earl Poteet, who is an author, a teacher, and a practitioner of psychotherapy and a licensed clinical social worker. And he's with the National Center for School Engagement, Pueblo West, Colorado. And in the middle here is Ms. Terry Martinez McGraw. She is the co-director for the National Center for School Engagement, Pueblo West, Colorado, and the Exceptional Student Services Coordinator for Chavez Huerto Preparatory Academy in Pueblo, Colorado. And then to her right is Mr. Fred Segura. He is the principal at Dolores Huerto Preparatory Academy in Pueblo, Colorado. We're very happy to have the three of you here to tell us about your program there and how you are supporting students who may have been subject to some type of trauma, and how that trauma impacts their ability to learn and be successful in school.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
It's great. And when you're talking about trauma and education, really where you have to start is with the brain and the body, because trauma has a profound effect on the brain and the body. And neuroscientifically, we know that traumatic memories can affect everyone. And with learners, especially young learners, adolescent learners, the fact that trauma has a significant impact on the brain is going to affect the way they learn. So we have to understand that. And I think it's very important from both an educator viewpoint as being a teacher as well as being a psychotherapist, that we start by educating about the brain and the body at a very young age, as young as we can tolerate it, educationally speaking. And the reason for that is because our memories are based on certain things and certain events that happen to us in our lives. But trauma affects our brain and our nervous system much different than, say, meeting someone who is very nice and does something nice for us. And the reason for that is very simple. It's a survival-based thing that we as human beings have come to the earth with, we've evolved with, and when we're born, we're actually, in some cases, unfortunately, some of us are born traumatized because of what happens to mom in utero while we're in utero. And if she's getting the chemicals, the two chemicals that are the most highly suspected chemicals in this whole process are cortisol and norepinephrine or adrenaline. If we get too much of that, if mom gets too much of that before we're born, we can be born kind of wired that way. And it's kind of being wired for survival. Now, memories are such that if it's a pleasant memory, we may remember it. It may bring tears of joy to us. It may bring other things to us. But a lot of trauma memories will be stored in our somatic or our subconscious memory. And a lot of those are actually stored in a couple of areas in our limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, which are very closely related to the effects of releasing of cortisol and adrenaline in life. And the way we've become such adept survivors as humans on this earth is that these memories are kind of stored in the same areas, in the same ways, and give us the same reaction. And the reason for that is because it makes it easier for us to survive. Now, the problem with trauma is a lot of times because they get stored in subconscious memory in our amygdala and the hippocampus, they get stored there because we want to remember them right now. We don't want to wait for that. And if you think about that ancestrally, it's the same as walking. Peter Levine in his book, Waking the Tiger, describes it very well, where you could be walking along a path and all of a sudden a tiger jumps out of a bush and attacks you. Maybe it devours your partner that you're with, and the next time you go by that bush, you're going to have that memory of what happened. Now, we may not have that memory known to us at the time, but when you're talking about trauma in the forms of either big T traumas, which are obvious traumas, the horrific things that happen to us as human beings in life, or you're talking about the little T traumas that are built up. Just for example, the one I like to use is the one that I'm most familiar with from growing up, is that you're not going to be worthy. You're not going to do well. You're not going to be able to survive. How are you going to do this? You're dumb. You're whatever the case may be. These are little T traumas that over time become profound just as much. When we see, then we go along several days later, several weeks, several months. In some cases, as a psychotherapist, I've worked with folks who didn't have an abreaction. In other words, a reaction to what happened to them 30 years before until much, much later. And then all of a sudden, maybe they smelled something that reminded them of a trauma. They heard something, they tasted something, they saw something, or they experienced something that is reminiscent of that trauma. And that immediately will click in that fight or flight response through the autonomic nervous system throughout our body and cause us to go into survival mode. So what that looks like then is to us is a stress response. And we can see on the slide that the parts of the brain that I'm talking about here. This is the limbic system. The amygdala and the hippocampus are right there. The amygdala, by the way, is if I'm teaching a small child about what's going on, the amygdala houses those memories that can cause anger, anxiety, and these things that too much cortisol and adrenaline can cause. The hippocampus also has the job of storing memory, among other things as well. So if I'm a young child and I'm talking about the amygdala, I'm going to tell them amygdala is Latin for almond. So if they start to get angry, I might walk up to them as an intervention, for example, and say, is there something wrong with your almond? Now, that sounds like a silliness, but that silliness also serves a purpose. It's as a detractor from what's actually going on neurobiologically. That chemical reaction that they're feeling gets disrupted. And then that means you can go in and intervene even further at that point, if that makes sense. So the stress response, the one thing that we know for sure that is a predictor of the stress response is the one thing is the heart rate variability. In other words, cortisol, adrenaline, they increase heart rate. And they increase heart rate because they're going to pump blood to the major muscle groups for fight or flight. And so if you've got someone who, for example, was maybe at recess and they've played a little too voraciously, well, they might be replicating some fight-flight stuff from something that happened, even pre-K kids, kindergarten kids, all of this stuff. You have to kind of look and watch their behaviors out on playgrounds. If they come back too ramped up, check their heart rate variability and see if they're just breathing too heavily, maybe breathing through the mouth instead of through the nose. By the way, I had a cardiologist one time, 20 or so years ago, explain to me that the reason I passed out one time while driving my car and got to take a nice little Disney type e-ticket trip down I-25 rolling over was because I was breathing in through my mouth, and that caused me to hyperventilate. And so the lungs did not get the air heated sufficiently because I was breathing through the mouth, according to his description. And I agree with him. And so I kind of lost it, and that momentary lapse caused me to do that. Now, if it can be that severe with an adult doing that, think about what that could possibly do to a child as well in fight-flight response. So the stress response is very important to know. It's very important, I think, to teach this. In psychotherapy, we kind of do this as a normalization of symptoms. In working with active duty Army personnel at Fort Carson during my career, as well as working with veterans through Veterans Affairs, I know that one thing that is really profound in therapy is to normalize the symptoms. So they will come to you, and a child will not be able to tell you what traumatized them, most likely, but they know that the lack of attachment somehow innately will cause that. We know that the lack of support and other things can cause these traumatic things that they're feeling. And so we need to take, the first step needs to be to normalize these symptoms. It's okay, I understand. I don't have to feel that pain in a very strongly sympathetic or even highly empathic way. I need to be compassionate about understanding that and normalizing it. So I don't really necessarily need to know what happened, but I can ask myself what happened, and I can know what the response is. So the stress response is very critical to this whole process. And I think teaching the stress response as much as we can, the hippocampus is a funny word to a kid too, especially the younger they are. I mean, I've worked with kiddos that, you tell them what's wrong with your school of hippos. Well, that's going to set them a little bit back as well and give you that intervention. Well, what's my school of hippos? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. It's where a lot of things are stored in your brain. And memory, by the way, our neurons in our hearts and our lungs and other parts, our intestines and everything, also play a role in memory, and somatic memory especially, in terms of a child's vagus nerve, which runs the length of it's a cranial nerve. It runs the length of the body and connects to the intestines. You'll see a lot of kids, especially younger kids, that come to school and they don't feel good. They'll tell you, teacher, I have my tummy doesn't feel good. I feel like I'm going to be sick. A lot of that is fight-flight response, and to understand that and recognize that first of all is okay, and then to ask them, do you know why that is? Of course, they're not going to know why. Can I ask why you you might be having that. Would it be okay to explore some of that? Okay.
So
Without-
first, the adult needs to understand the physical and what's happening physically, and then you hope that you eventually teach the child to understand what's happening. And
self-aware,
to strategize.
because that self-awareness then allows you to go deeper in the teaching of this is the big thing of social and emotional learning, right, is how to regulate self. I don't think we can do that without teaching the basics of the stress response here, okay? And I think it's also imperative that we understand through that stress response that it doesn't have to be that painful, because a child will come to you and tell you that your tummy doesn't feel very good, but to understand that compassionately. Paul Bloom just wrote a great book, Against Empathy, it's called. So it sounds a little confrontative of the word and the use of empathy. But I do agree with his concept that if we are using our higher executive functions as adults, as you mentioned, to help that child regulate this stress response, then we've got a better shot at winning the battle with them. So there's also something called the freeze response. We have the fight or flight response, but we also have the freeze response. And the freeze response basically comes about as a result of folks who can't feel like they can run and they can't fight. In other words, the odds are overwhelming that I'm not going to win the fight, so why try? The free, I'm not going to be able to outrun the tiger as it is, so why try? So the other thing is to replicate a dissociative state or a fugue state. You can call it many different things, but it really is a freeze response where you're feigning death. Now that freeze response may work in the wild when a gazelle's being chased down by a tiger and it's about to get caught, or a lion, and it just drops feigning death and becomes stiff. And then when the lion loses interest because the meal's no longer warm, well, or just walks around, well, it's already gone, so I can walk around and go talk to my buddies and come back and get it. You can pop back up and get out of there, and it saves you. It's a fight-flight response as well. In human beings, it works a lot differently, because when you have a freeze response, you will record somatically or subconsciously, again, all the events that are going on during that freeze response, and you'll store them in the hippocampus and in the amygdala, in different areas of the cortex as well. And you will use them later on to survive again, because if it ever happens again, I want to know, I got to get out of there, and I got to do it now. But as in the case of people that have had in my psychotherapy practice, I've come across people that have a conversion disorder with complications such as seizures or other abreactions. They have no idea why they're having this. And a conversion disorder means medically there's no medical basis for it. So they've been to neurologists, they've been to psychologists, they've been to everybody medically that they can feasibly go to and not get an answer as to why they're having seizures or whatever the other case may be. And so it gets stored in our memory system, and it gets stored in our body as well as our brain, as I mentioned earlier, through the neurons that are in all of our bodies. The most extreme example I've ever seen was a Marine Corps vet, a female Marine Corps vet, who had an episode of sexual assault when she was unfortunately 7 years old. And she was able to enact that freeze response at that time, but then she dissociated for 30 years and buried that memory as far as you can, because who wants to remember that even remotely? It's a horrible thing for a 7-year-old to have to deal with. But as a 37-year-old, they started having seizures. They couldn't find any basis for the seizures. 10 years later, I started treating them, and we uncovered what was causing the seizures, and we were able to deal with them in a more medically profound way after that. But when the person would have a seizure, it would look and I don't know if you can see this on camera, but their arm would twist in this way and their leg would twist over. So they're covering their private areas just as they probably did, 40 years prior when that episode was taking place. And that's an extreme example of the freeze response, but how many kids do you see that shut down in class? That's almost an exact replication of that freeze response. So as an educator, I need to know that. When I see it, then I can start to engage and address that. Okay. So the long-term effects of stress on the brain and the nervous system, to make a really long story short, and we're trying to be as concise and shorten our presentation down so that I don't overwhelm you with neurological terms and everything that you're going to forget anyway, and it's not relevant that you know these things. You just have to know the effects. But the long-term effects are that the children are going to be on alert. They're going to be on alert. And by the way, as in my example earlier that you're not going to be worthy, you're never going to survive, these kind of messages, if they're getting anything that is remotely like that at home and they're bringing it to school, we have to see the effects of that. And the effects of that can be that they're freezing, they're not engaging in the work, they're not capable of the work, they're very fidgety, and they can't sit still. I think there's a lot of basis. There's a book that came out that unfortunately, the name of the doctor that wrote the book slips my mind right now, but the title of the book was ADHD Doesn't Exist, with an asterisk above it. And I believe that there's a lot of veracity in what he says, because things that look like ADHD can be something totally different than ADHD. It can be something, as he says, simply vision problems or hearing problems, all the way up to problems with iron and too much iron in the blood, not enough iron in the blood, different proteins. There's so many things that it could be causing the ADHD. I, as a psychotherapist and a teacher, always look at what happened. Is there some possibility of unresolved trauma and possibly ongoing trauma as a reason? If I know this and I can attempt to normalize the way they feel with the kiddo, then I've got a much better chance of winning the battle of getting the educational game started.
So what you seem to be saying is that a lot of our frustration as teachers, and a student either, I can now picture students in my class years ago that probably froze. They were having a freeze response because they didn't think they could win with the academic learning. They knew they couldn't get up and run away without getting in trouble, so they just froze.
Right, right. I had a freeze response when I took the GRE years ago. I got and when I got my results back, it was amazing. I had one where I was at the 97th percentile and one where I was at the 7th. And it was because after I had expended so much energy getting to the 97th on the first one, that was probably the first one that I did. I can't remember the exact order, but by the time I got to the 7% quartile of the test, I was done. That's it. That was that was a voluntary freeze response on my part. But yes, you're absolutely right.
I see.
And so it interferes with, I know I've felt like I'm so stressed I can't think straight.
Yes.
And I think everybody's felt that too. That
Absolutely.
There's like stress and you just can't even think how to turn a light on or whatever. It's just,
right. And the thing I think before I turn it over to my esteemed colleagues here, the thing I think that helps us is all of our sensory information that comes into our brains for processing, except for the sense of smell, goes back to the brain and then comes forward in two different paths. And the reason it does that is it goes through the limbic system, which you were shown earlier, and it assesses it for danger, and those memories that we talked about of the traumas that were implanted in those areas of the brain, as well as the cortex, are going to alert us to danger or possible danger or something that felt like something before that was dangerous to us, whether it was math. By the way, I was also traumatized when in first grade by my first grade teacher, unknowingly to her, by not being able to pass a math worksheet. And I was made to stay after school on a day that I was supposed to go with my parents. My dad worked for the railroad and the circus train was in town. And I was told that morning, you be home by such and such a time so we can go down to the rail yard and see that. Well, I was held after school because I did poorly on that math. I'm pretty sure that set me up for math failure later on.
Yeah.
I really am. And I didn't realize that, honestly, until just a couple years ago. But yeah, so, it goes to the front part as well, which is our executive function seat in our brain. But if it tastes any danger at all here, it's not going to gate this, but it's sure going to make it tough to react, as you said.
Right.
Yes.
Very good. So where do we go from there? So what we need to do is that we need to really make sure that we provide the best professional development there is available for our children and for our students and our faculty. And not only just, and when I'm talking faculty, I'm talking everyone in the school, from the lunch lady to the principal to everyone who's going to be in contact with our children. We need to create a climate of caring and trusting and making sure that they know that they are coming to a safe place, that we will be there to take care of them. The number one thing that we really preach at the National Center for School Engagement is relationships. With relationships, we have to make sure that our children have at least one significant adult that they can trust and they could latch onto in case that they're not feeling safe. I used to be an assistant principal at an alternative school, and one thing that we did have is we had community advocates in our school. And the community advocates, what they did were they worked with our deep end kids, our kids that were really experiencing trauma, effects of trauma, were on the verge of dropping out of school, were the kids that were just sinking very quickly. So right as soon as they entered the school, because we did a questionnaire as soon as they did come into school to see what type of issues there were. And we were able to pair them up with a community advocate as soon as they entered the school.
Staff person at the school?
Right, that was a staff person at the school. So they had I was director of student support services for a school district, and I made sure that there was one in every school. And the kids all knew who that caring adult was. We made sure that we hired people from the neighborhood that had that were school employees, that had lots of training on providing safety nets for kids. And we were able to really do a lot of great things, just having the community advocates and those safety nets in our school. Now, when you're talking about looking at a real school environment that is going to be very productive for our children, we have to make sure that we have our positive behavior support systems in place. By that, I mean that there has to be a common language that goes throughout the school, that we all know what we're talking about, and the kids are familiar with the language in which we speak. How do we treat one another? What are the rules of our school? What are the things that we do that will help each other? Is bullying allowed or is it not allowed? What about the different rules that we have in our school? What are the things that are going to be important? Those things need to be decided by students and staff. Mm-hmm. They cannot be coming just from the top down, but it really needs to be a climate and a culture of caring. So when you put that together, your PBIS school, it should be, how do you act, in the lunchroom? How do you act when you go to class? How do you act when you're walking down the hallway? How do we treat one another? What are the rules in the bathroom? So when kids know that they're safe and kids know what are expected of them, they generally do pretty well. And so we have to create that culture of kindness, caring, and really becoming almost a family unit. One of the other things that we want to make sure is I had all of my teachers outside the school building. I wanted to make sure that every single one of my teachers were meeting and greeting every single one of my kids coming into the school. Because it's very important to see if Johnny is having a good day or a bad day, just by the look in your face. Hey Johnny, how you doing? Nice to see you today. How's your mom doing? Everything going good?
Great.
Smile on his face, you know, kind of looks like it's going to be going okay. Hey Jane, see you're looking, something going on? How you doing? You know, it's just that. And by the way, Earl describes a technique that we use a lot, that I just did right now. And it's really when, we've got to be very careful when we're touching kids, especially that have experienced trauma. So make sure that you know your kids before you touch them in any certain way. But one of the techniques that, I'm getting a little bit off base here, but one of the techniques that Earl uses a lot is if a kid is having a hard time and if he knows them, he puts his hand right here on his back. And notice where the hand is. It's right by the heart. And Earl, do you want to just explain that little technique a little bit?
Yeah, I picked up this technique at a conference, at a training several years ago, and it makes sense from a attachment standpoint, where when a baby is born, typically they are held in a cradling position with the hand behind the back, or behind the chest on the back, and it's typically, since they're not very big, it's right behind the heart. And the other part that's a little more difficult to do with kids as an intervention, in especially in the older grades, is to hold and cradle the back of the head. But either one of those kind of immediately, somatically, subconsciously takes us back to that feeling of being loved here right after we're born. So that technique alone has been taught by me, myself, and the rest of us to great success. And it's so simple. It's such a you have to remember too, and I think one of the things that it does is a lot of trauma is nonverbal, and rightfully so. If we could describe the traumas that some of these kiddos have experienced, and some of us as adults have experienced through life, it would be horrific. And so these non-verbal type of interventions are some of the best.
Mm-hmm. Right. So those little tools really do help. And it really speaks volumes to kids. Hey, you care about me, I feel safe, and I feel loved. Another thing that I really think that's important when kids come into our schools is to make sure that we're doing strength-based inventories, because it is very critical that we already know what's wrong with kids. They already know what's wrong with them. Their families already know what's going on. We need to celebrate their strengths, and we always need to recognize their strengths and always work from a strength-based perspective. We've got to make sure that we know what they're good at. And we've got to give them opportunity to learn and to share their talents and work with other kids that may not have those kinds of talents, so that really can drive their feeling of, hey, I am worthy, and I am capable. And when you see those things, we want to make sure that we don't ever want to lower the bar when it comes to academic standards. We want to make sure that our academic standards are always high. And with that, always providing our safety nets with them. If our safety nets are not there and we just hold expectations up here, that never works. We've got to say, how are we going to get there? What is our roadmap? And we've got to make sure that we are providing predictable, safe paths for our kids to achieve their goals. With predictability, we will have academic outcomes. With relationships, we will have good academic outcomes. So, with all of that, we've got to make sure that we are looking at our kids, we're evaluating them, we're celebrating their strengths. We want to know, hey, how's mom doing? Or how's dad doing? Or show that you're interested in them as a student, and someone who you're happy to have in your class, and that they are there to really give a lot of good input. We also really need to work on is a lot of our kids, I did foster care for 16 years. My parents did and my grandparents did, so I'm a third generation foster parent. But one of the things that we did not know, and a lot of things that we worked with a lot of our foster kids in our home, a lot of our kids come to us and they don't know how to express feeling or emotion, because a lot of them did not have the proper nurturing in the first 3 to 6 months or 6 years of their lives. So they've shut down, they've isolated, they've gone into their freeze zone. And so it's very critical and it's very important to teach kids how to feel, or teach kids how to express emotion. Okay, Johnny just did a really good writing paper. Tell me how you feel about that. Feel? I don't feel any, it's a paper. No, let's talk about it. Come here, let's talk about it. Get the kid to open up and talk about how he did that. What made you think of that? Wow, you know, those are some of your strengths. And so teaching kids how to express emotions are very, very important. Another thing to teach is how do we get our kids to self-regulate? Because when we have kids who have been through traumatizing experiences, they can go from 0 to 10 just like that. And for them to get them to calm down and to come back and to be an active participant in the classroom, then we've got to get them into that safe zone. And we've got to make sure that we create a comfort zone within our classrooms. When I was an SED teacher, I taught serious emotional disturbance, kids with serious emotional disturbances. And what I did is I had in my classroom, I had a recliner, and I also had my dog that I would take to school every day. So if my kids were having an outburst, they knew, hey, I'm starting to get out of control, help me. And they would look around like, you know, someone help me or else I'm just going to lose it. And they would go directly to the recliner. The dog would jump on the lap. They'd start petting the dog, and their emotions would go down. So those are some of the techniques that that we've been able to accomplish within the learning environment.
That recliner chair seems to kind of sum 3 things you mentioned about. There was predictability.
Right.
And there's the physical, the petting the dog is kind of the physical calming down, and just the normal to have feelings. So there's a chair for it, even in our classroom.
And it's that they're safe. It wasn't with the regular classroom. I mean, it was clear back in the corner. They were able to express and do what they wanted. And the minute the dog would jump on their lap, it was just like, because what kid, you know, unless you have a seriously emotionally disturbed kid, what kid is going to want to hurt an animal?
And they can do it themselves.
Right.
It gives them the power to regulate.
Right. So it's teaching them how to self-regulate. And nothing is more rewarding than to see a child learn that.
And what Terry just described, by the way, was, you know, there's parts of the autonomic nervous system that become engaged when you're in fight-flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one that does not become engaged. So you don't want to be in sympathetic. What she just said with the example of the dog and the recliner is that she was able to get the child out of sympathetic nervous system reactivity, a fight-flight, and get them into parasympathetic, which is the calming, more rational, able to get to that prefrontal cortex part of the brain. If you're in sympathetic nervous system reactivity, it's very difficult to think your way through it. As you mentioned before, I just can't. I'm so distraught. I'm so whatever that I can't get there. Yes.
So a lot of the things that we have practiced within the school systems have really been how to get children to self-regulate, making sure that we rehearse situations with kids, making sure that relationships are our number one. Without a relationship, our kids aren't going to do anything. So we have to have that positive adult in their system. We do a lot of role playing as well, and try to do to help kids act out different situations. You know what? We love teachable moments. Earl and I are Love and Logic facilitators as well.
Yeah.
So those teachable moments are probably some of our most favorite things that we're able to process with kids. And we really want kids in thinking mode and not in reactive mode. And when we get our kids in thinking mode, then they're able to better problem solve what's going on. So we have to teach them those strategies as well. We got to teach them also when they're getting stuck and they're frustrated. What do you do? What do you feel? What do you do when you're feeling hopeless? What are some of the things that you can do? You never ask a child what's wrong with you. You always ask a child, what happened? What happened? And what can we do? And let's talk about this. So those are probably the two most important things that we really need to think about. And with that, I can go into like all other sorts of things that really kind of, detach our kids, but I'm going to keep it short for right now. For example, suspensions and expulsions, and that's a whole other different area that we can go into. But at my school, we were able to get our suspension rate down to like 3%, because suspensions just disengage kids from school, unless it's really a huge topic. So, and then plus, it also, if you're not doing it correctly, then, a lot of traumatic events could happen from that. You don't want me, I don't feel loved, on and on and on.
So everybody in the school needs to practice this and have the professional development to learn what's behind it and to know how to react and what they need to put into their schoolroom. So how do you make that happen?
And how long
I'm
does
glad
it
you
take?
asked.
Yes, I was thinking maybe you could give us an example of how you bring.
Well, you got me on a subject that I just love to death. I love talking about my school. I am the principal of Dolores Huerta Preparatory Academy. We are a school of about 85% Hispanic students, minority students, primarily Hispanic, 79% free and reduced lunch. So to say that our students have difficulties is an understatement. They come to school with a lot of baggage and a lot of things that affect them, and a lot of times the last thing that they're thinking about is how am I going to do in math today, or how am I going to do in social studies, or this project that I need to do. It is a very difficult school to look at academic achievement and try to achieve academic achievement. Our absenteeism rate is above 20%. We have a large number of students that are truant and are in a truancy program, if you will. But through all of that, I have great kids at my school. And I love the kids at my school. My staff loves the kids at my school. But we are people too. And it gets very frustrating after a while to go through the processes of trying to implement things that aren't showing results at the end of the day. So what I talked to Terry and to Earl about was, what can we do in our school to really affect and help our students that do go through trauma, and what are these programs that we can bring in? And I know Terry just had her couple of slides up, but really looking at those and trying to make a more effective school from a lot of these ideas that they presented are some of the things that we brought forth. This is my first year as principal at Dolores Huerta. And one of the things that I did through my first couple of months was just observe the interactions between teachers and students. And I saw a lot of what you're describing. How would you feel as a student being in a classroom if you're told you're not very good at this, you'll never amount to anything? What does it take to get your attention? The teachers just did not have the skills really to deal with a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing within the classroom. This is a tough school. Many students are affiliated with gangs. There are some drug and alcohol things, not only going on with the students, but also with the adults, the parents within the school. So that was one of the first things that I wanted to address. And through a structured program, we did take a look at that, and that was one of the first things that I talked about was, you gotta love your students. You gotta care for your students. You gotta make that impact within their lives to make sure that they understand that you're there for them, not the other way around. You're not gonna be there for the students. You're not there because they need a teacher. You're there because you want to be there and because you care for those kids. So that was one of the first things that as we came in, as we had talked about, is when a student comes to you and they complain of a bullying issue, for instance, you take the time, hey, you know what, we might be in the middle of a lesson right now, but let me take the time to listen to you maybe after class. Come and see me at lunchtime. Come and see me after school. Let me make a block of time for you so that I can get to the root of the issue and we can contact the people that can help you out. Or maybe it's something within the classroom. Never take any concern lightly. Always make sure that you're attentive and you're willing to address the needs of an individual student at any time they bring something to you. That was the first piece of changing the culture of the school. And we've had the opportunity, the main office during the first semester, you'd see it was a zoo in there. 7, 8 kids, 10 kids waiting to see myself or the assistant principal or the counselor or whoever was available, because again, teachers really didn't know how to deal with these issues. By the second semester, once we started changing the culture there, it was quiet, and I'd walk out of my office and I'd look at my assistant, where is everybody? Well, what's going on in here?
Too quiet.
It's too quiet. But they started to take effect. Hey, there are people out there that do care for me, that do want to help me with whatever issues are going on. We did bring in both Terry and Earl during the first semester to do a Love and Logic presentation to us. So they came in and they presented to the staff about Love and Logic. There's some great programs out there. Flippin' Relationship Building is another one. But any of those programs that you can teach teachers and provide teachers that staff development on how to care, how to react to when students are going off the edge a little bit. I had an incident in which one of my students had a fight in the boys' bathroom, and we thought it was a fight club type of thing going on there. Normally, they would come in and they would, Fred, these students need to go. They need to be suspended. They're fighting. Automatic 3 days, zero tolerance, no questions asked. Suspend them. I walked over to the classroom and the student was still in there, pulled him out, brought him back to the office, and I brought my counselor in, I brought my wrestling coach in, those people who he had relationships with. And he shared with them, you know what, my mom tried to commit suicide last night. I don't know how to handle this. And it was because we had a team effort. He had people that had built relationships with him within the classroom, that now he has the opportunity to express himself and to feel safe. And now I have people that I can talk to. I have people that are going to take care of me. We dealt with that situation, and we were able to get him back on the right track without a suspension, without putting him or any type of consequence. Now, we did have good discussions about, you know what, that's not the appropriate way to address something like this. But at the end of the day, instead of just saying, like I know many schools and many school districts will say, you know what, it doesn't matter. You're fighting in 3 days, you're 3 days out, it doesn't matter. No, we're going to give you the opportunity to explain yourself, what is happening, and let us take care of you for what's happening within the classroom.
And he had the opportunity to self-regulate and learn how to do that and successfully the next time.
Exactly. If we could move the slide. Thank you. Okay. And here's some more data just about some of the things that are going on. We do have a great graduation rate. I'll go into that here in just a second if you want to move one more. Thank you. Okay. So again, we talked about the Love and Logics training. One of the things that Terry had mentioned again, we still have to keep our curriculum rigorous. We do have to keep our curriculum very, the expectations have to be high within our school. We are a preparatory school. we are trying to ensure that our students are ready for college by the time that they do graduate. We're trying to get them ready for college by the time they're freshmen in high school. One of the big things that we're proud about is our ECP program, our early college program, which takes our ninth grade students and allows them to take college classes at both Pueblo Community College and the Colorado State University Pueblo while they're still in high school. And that's something that we've seen great success for. But one of the things that I wanted to implement at the high school also was a teaching and learning framework, in which was brought about by the Colorado Department of Education, to say, here are the objectives that we're going to be teaching. We're going to ensure that students, this is what they know and are able to do, and that we break it down and we put the objectives into student-friendly terms so that they know specifically what they know and they are able to do when they walk into the classroom. They have a depth of knowledge, because a lot of times within the classroom it may say, use the quadratic equations to solve problems. Well, is that analyzing? Is that synthesizing? Is that judging? Is that making corrections, error analysis? What does that look like as far as that specific concept is? So we brought that into place as a teaching technique for the teachers, and all the teachers are on board with that. So now when I get lesson plans turned in, or when they put their objectives on the board, the students are specific about what they need to know and be able to do. The teachers the same, and then as I walk in and as I walk around the classroom and speak with them, what are you learning today? And you can see the excitement in their eyes to say, yes, I understand specifically what we're learning and what it relates to and how far in depth I have to go with the specific subject. The assessments, the teaching techniques, the differentiation, all of that is tied into that specific objective, so that students are able to learn what they need to know for the day, and that we get through the year's course curriculum specifically about what the state of Colorado wants them to know about their standards. Okay. We have a mentoring program, a star mentoring program within our school that we introduced this year. And that gives our 7th and 8th graders an opportunity to work with the juniors and seniors of the school, the upperclassmen. They get advice, mentoring, tutoring from upperclassmen. So again, that's just another level of that being able to be safe within the school. Mm-hmm. They go to them, they speak with them about issues that they're having at their level, whether it be with other students, peers, or their teachers, and they can talk with them, and those juniors and seniors offer advice to the students and really put our at-risk population back on track and really give them assistance, not from that authoritative point of view from the teacher or from the administration, but really from a peer-to-peer point of view. And the kids have really, especially our middle school students, have really reacted and done well with that. And we've seen greater behaviors, positive behaviors from them. They'll go to them and say, I got in a little bit of trouble. I was running down the hallway, or I was, pushing and shoving, and I shouldn't have, and I got called out on that. And the seniors will come up to them and say, well, you know better than to do that type of thing. It really is more of a big brother, big sister mentality at the school, and it's a great way for us to work with the younger students in, like I said, not such an authoritarian way. They get a lot of help from the upperclassmen. Yeah. I like that.
I was thinking about if you have people moving in new to the school, that whole culture probably, they get it pretty easily because of all the way the peers are already handling things, and then
it's a common language.
Yeah.
And community of caring.
How long does it take to move a teacher or a group of teachers, a faculty, from what you described as when you first came to the school to being able to, as a team, to implement this type of behavior model?
It's always a process. Are we at where we want to be at? No. I don't think I'll ever accept where we're at as being the perfect model, if you will. But I think we've seen improvements over the last 6 months from when we brought in the professional development for them, and when we started and those objectives have gone into place. I think we've seen those teachers soften up a little bit. And now, do I still see it in the hallway? Not as much. And when I do, that comes back to coaching and mentoring and saying, you know what, we can address students a different way. We can tell them that, hey, what's going on today? It's like Terry said earlier, when you greet a student at the door, you can tell whether or not, hey, it's going to be a good day, I got something that I really want to share with the class, or you know what, I got something on my mind and I need to talk to somebody about it. So let me give you a couple of minutes to kind of share with you about what's going on and kind of get into that point. So again, we're not quite there where I want to be yet, but it's been a continuous improvement process. And like I said, you can tell by the culture within the school that things are improving. Things have gotten much more positive within the school, and the number of referrals that we had have dramatically dropped from the first semester to the second semester.
And I think it's very important to remember when our kids come to school with their backpacks, it's not necessarily books that are in their backpacks.
Yeah.
They come to school with lots of different things that have gone on that night before, whether it's in their family setting or personal setting or whatever. So we have to be mindful of that as educators.
And the other thing, and if I could go back to your question that Fred answered so well, I would like to throw in as well that when we do these trainings, the first thing that I find is most revealing about the teachers, when you ask about how tough it is to get from point A to point B, it's sometimes it's very tough. But after giving them our neurobiological examples of what happens to trauma, you would not believe how many teachers have come up to us after our trainings and said, I never realized that about myself. And so I think it's imperative, and that's a great question, but I think a lot of this is not only imperative that we teach it to our students, but we teach it to ourselves.
How to take care of
How to take care of ourselves. Because if I know what my triggers are, and I know them very well by now, believe me, and my wife knows that I know them very well, but if our students don't know what my triggers are, can I expect them to react empathically or compassionately with me as an educator? I don't think so. So I think that whole give and take that we do as educators and students, and we heard it in one of the sessions today, that the children teach us more than we teach them. They really do.
They really do.
And so if we understand that whole concept about what's going on from the top here down to the feet, then we can get it.
In our 15 effective strategies, Karen, one of the foundation strategies is from years of research at the center and other places is that we must have a safe school environment, but more than just safe from violence or bullying, safe as in I feel and want to be there. And to learn.
Yes.
And this has been an excellent example of how important that is. We get a lot of questions from school systems that say, well, my alternative program's not working. That's an effective strategy, isn't it? My tutoring program's not working. That's an effective strategy, isn't it? Well, maybe the foundation isn't there. And this has been an excellent program here where
Yes.
we've learned how to go from some very, in my understand sophisticated knowledge about brain and biology and the neural system to how do we transmit that to a school and how do we implement it at a school. So this has been a great presentation on how to create tools for a trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed school and to create successful students and graduates as a result. This has been a great solutions for us. You folks have been excellent to share.
Thank you.
I hope that our viewers will refer this episode to your colleagues once you've viewed it. It's archived on our website at www.dropoutprevention.org. We hope that you will take advantage of contacting us. The contact information will be there for our guests, where that you can be emailed or we can respond or we can make connections with you and folks that will view this and will say, you've got to give me more. How do we accomplish this in our school? So it's been a great solutions episode here from Reaching the Wounded Student and the Freshman Success Conferences in Orlando. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our viewers for taking the time to learn more, because as we as educators and professionals, as we learn, we understand, and we do the work that we need to do differently to get the results. So thank you for viewing Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, sponsored by K-12 and Fuel Education. Thank you for looking to Clemson University and the National Dropout Prevention Center for your resources.